Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure and actually my first time in Estonia. So especially because of that, obviously great to be here. And thank you all for joining me here in this room and not being in one of the others. First of all, before I start talking a bit about myself, I want to hear about you. I mean, this being mostly a dev conference, I would like to know who of you is or would consider himself an analyst or being into business intelligence, this kind of stuff. Cool, that's a very good amount. Who would consider himself more a developer? Okay, that's more what I would have expected. And is there any marketeers? I don't think so, right? Okay, good. Now I have a very good view about who you are. About myself, just briefly, so you know more or less who I am. I'm originally from Stuttgart in the south of Germany, but I moved to Berlin. I have a bachelor's in computer science and a master in business. And yeah, I used to work for Rocket Internet, a big Berlin-based startup company. Many people hate it because they copy companies from the US. I worked in digital analytics there, which was actually the first time I actually worked in that business, but I had the chance to learn a lot there, and also my studies helped me a bit. Since, for 1 year now almost, I'm freelancing. I founded the Berlin Digital Analytics Meetup, which is a monthly gathering where about 50 people from the analytics scene come together and speak about that. There are also some presentations every time. And I'm currently in the process of founding an agency with 2 other guys. And with that agency, we want to cover the entire data chain. So this is basically the topic I'm talking about today as well. Even though myself, I'm more the specialist for digital analytics and therefore connecting online marketing and BI in the end. Great, so without further ado, I would start with the actual content. And one of the very typical questions, how data-driven are you? I would say the lowest, or the first thing to do would be to start with web analytics. Then you might go into data warehousing, and then is where the fancy stuff you do, data mining, machine learning, and so on. And this is when you actually get data-driven. We must admit it, on the lower part, we're more or less data aware and maybe not really data driven yet. So still, this is the first time I will probably disappoint you. I will be talking about this part. And the reason is, for one, I'm not an expert of these, to be honest. But on the other hand, if you don't get this part right, I think you shouldn't even start with that one. Because it's that garbage in, garbage out principle. If you don't have the basic, the foundation set, your machine learning, I think, won't help you a lot. So what do I consider this data chain? It would be that. We can argue about that. It's maybe a bit simplified, and maybe it might look different from your point of view in your company, from your perspective. But I hope that it is something we can agree on to say how more or less typical flow in a company should look like. If you're completely saying this is wrong, please tell me in the questions. I'm okay with that. Why did I put it the way it is? A very important chunk of data, especially from my point of view being a digital analyst, is online marketing data and on-site user behavior. Also being a digital analyst, this is the parts I analyze the most. I might understand if you're more from the BI side that also other data sources become more important to you, but for simplification purposes, I want to focus on these. So we have these two. Then this data usually goes somewhere into web analytics, into a web analytics system where you can analyze it. Mostly use that for ad hoc analysis. So if I need to generate a report now, if I want to steer my campaigns now, this is what I do with my web analytics. Then what you would usually try is to put that data together with some other data sources like your backend data, your sales that come from the backend, maybe some cost data you're not getting from the web analytics software. You want to join that in your data warehouse, and this is where you want to generate your regular reporting on. That you would feed to all of the stakeholders, and this is the part where the fancy stuff starts. For the actual insight generation, you could use that in the end, that data you have in your data warehouse, to do some data science on that, like put it into R or whatever. Then I want to talk a bit about the evolution of digital analytics. How did we actually get there? As said before, my focus is definitely that middle part of this chain, all this tracking and web analytics stuff, but I'm trying to put that in a bigger scope with all the other components as well. And how do we actually get there? The evolution of digital analytics. I mean, first of all, it started with the IT figuring out, yay, we have server logs, and it's not only telling that something is going wrong with the server, but we can actually get a clue of what the users are doing there, which is very interesting. So obviously the stake there was more or less lying in the IT, with most of the IT guys doing that. Then they figured, wow, we can even put a pixel in there and maybe see what the users are doing. So if I put a pixel on a certain page and I can see that this pixel was loaded, I can tell that a visitor was there. And this is when marketing got involved, and they figured, hey, this is pretty cool. We can even track partner conversions or something like that from an affiliate, for example. And this is when these marketing tags started. You might have seen, who has seen, I think you have worked with marketing tags, right? Please raise your hand if you haven't. Okay. I mean, it's these small code snippets that you use to track affiliate conversions, or that you put in for Google Analytics, for example. This is when marketing got involved as a stakeholder, and they said, hey, we want to put these as well, and want to know what the people are actually doing. And then it became even better. We started to develop all this story around data warehousing, tag management systems that actually allow us to manage these different tags. And this is when also the business stakeholders got involved, saying, hey, we really want reports based on that, because this is really interesting for our business. So let's go into the first part of that chain. How do we actually track online marketing and on-site behavior, and why would we want to do that? First of all, the online marketing channels are obviously the places that generate this kind of data, and they can be divided into three categories. I would say we have owned, earned, and paid channels. This is just on a side note. I mean, in terms of tracking, it doesn't make a big difference. Still, I want to explain it, because usually when you think of online marketing channels, you would think of AdWords maybe, or paid Facebook. But I want to tell you that there are others as well. Like owned would be your newsletter, your website, your blog. This is all online marketing channels in the end that you want to measure. You have these earned channels, like organic search is kind of an outlier. Some people would put it in there, some not. But mentions and posts, for example, are a typical earned channel, like on social networks, when people are talking about you and sharing your posts. On blogs, when you get some coverage on some other blog. And then you have the classical, and that is what probably most people think of when speaking of online marketing channels, the paid ones, where like Facebook paid ads, for example, affiliate marketing, display ads like Google Display Network, for example. How do you track these? Usually with a tracking link like this, and mostly this is the only way to actually do it. And actually, speaking at a developer conference, I'm actually happy to tell that, because most of the developers, I think, are not aware of that, and don't even think that this could be necessary, because they get cut off on something, for example. But you would, for example, if I want to track the visits coming from a blog entry, or as here in the example from a Facebook ad, the link the ad is pointing to, where the user is clicking on, must have these kind of parameters. And then in my web analytics tool, I will just strip these parameters and use them for the analysis, because they will in the end tell me, this one was coming from Facebook, this one was a paid ad, this one was a campaign for Topcon. And yeah, why do I think this is important for developers? Because in some setups you see that they will just get cut off by a redirect, and obviously then your tracking is broke. There is another way of tracking as well, which is the click IDs, which is a bit more complex in the end, but they're usually just something provided by a certain online marketing provider. For example, AdWords has this click ID, which is in the end just the number that gets added instead of all these parameters. Obviously, it's then cryptic. This everyone can read. I mean, I see the link and I know what data I'm sending to your web analytics. With the click ID, it's not that easy. It's just a number that contains in the end the timestamp and some reference to the campaign. But it's pretty cryptic and can only be resolved from the web analytics or marketing tool itself in the end. Why is that important? I will show you later on, because on a different step of the chain, this can lead to some problems.
There are also third option, almost we are hierarchy when analytics is server-side or it's device dependent, for example. For example, in Google Analytics can be database, you have the Yelp library, but also you have deployed version of, for example, if you have an application.
Yeah.
And how the data is sent is very different.
But I'm talking only about web at the moment. I mean, app tracking is something completely different. It works very different from web tracking. And I mean, this would be a completely different talk to talk about web. And I'm going into server-side tracking as well.
As well as I want to mention there's support as well, not only me, but inside the images you also track data is being sent as metadata.
That's true, yes, but I cannot really tell the campaign from that. I can only send, and this is going into what you just said. This is how I would track the on-site behavior in the end. But for tracking campaigns, I would rely on these parameters, to be honest. For on-site user behavior, and this would basically be any action you're tracking on the page, like page view, button clicks, and whatever, I would rely on tags, or as you mentioned, the server logs, which would be like seeing if a certain image was loaded or something like that. Obviously, yes. But the question I want to, or what I want to get with this is, why do you need even these two types of data in one place? Why do we need the on-site behavior, like what the user is doing, which buttons is he clicking, and all that kind of stuff, and the campaign data in one place? Because we want to tell whether traffic from one certain source is converting better, does maybe get further down in the funnel. I want to be able to segment on that. I want to be able to build, to put the users into categories, saying, okay, these got that far in the channel, and see from which, that far in the funnel, and see by which marketing channels they came. And you can even do retargeting on some of the values, which is very interesting if you're working with Facebook ads, for example. And also interesting even for cross-device tracking, when you have a login, for example, where you can put a user ID. Now I'm getting into what you mentioned, the differences between client and server-side tracking. And I mean, I think most of the tracking done at the moment is done client-side, and I will go into the ups and downsides of all of them on the next slide. But on the client side, you work mostly with these tags. You put these small code snippets on websites. You work a lot with cookies because they allow you to persist the data. And in the end, that's why I put Google Analytics there. It's what you do with Google Analytics mostly. It is.
There is one thing missing with the client side. A lot of analytics use nowadays enable feature called user tracking, where the whole session where the user has been on the website is tracked. You can replay his action, what he did, where he spent the time.
Well, I don't know. I don't think you can actually do that with Google Analytics, but there is lots of tools where you can do that with. What I want to tell actually is you're working a lot with JavaScript, you're working on the client side in the end. As opposed to server-side tracking, which is very static, where you analyze the server logs, where you analyze what the user has seen, and you work mostly with tools like PHP, Ruby on Rails, or whatever you're using in the end to build your website. And it's what are the ups and downsides of each of them? Client side, I mean, you can see has, maybe this is because I'm a bit biased, but has a lot more upsides than server side in my opinion. It's much easier to put in, to implement, because you just have to add these tags, therefore it's easier to manage. There are so many different solutions already in place. You have lots of nice systems to manage the tags, what will be the next thing I'll be showing. And you have lots of solutions that already come out of the box. And it's much easier to measure the marketing channels because you can easily rely on these URLs. And the downside is you cannot capture every visitor. And why is that so? Because because not every user has JavaScript enabled, for example. Not every user is allowing cookies. There is this no track that you can flag in your browser. So this is can be a problem. You must, when you work with client-side tracking, you must know you're never tracking everything. On the other hand, when you work with your website logs or your web server logs, you know that you capture every user because when he has seen a page, he definitely loaded all the content and you will be able to grab them.
How common is that people actually disable the JavaScript?
It's very common actually. It's very common. Yeah, it's very common actually. And you will see differences from 10 to 15% usually, at least. Sorry, but can we just leave the questions behind because it will be very hard for me to keep the presentation flowing. And let's just do a session of questions after that for 10 minutes. Okay. Then for server side, it's much harder to integrate all the marketing channel data because it's not that easy to draw it from that URLs. You don't have that many already done solutions for you, and it's much more static, obviously, because you need to make the changes directly in your templates. You cannot do it as easy on the go as you will see in the next slides. And because of that, it's already much harder to manage. So this is where I go into tag management, which is a purely client-side concept. And one other thing to mention actually for server-side tracking, it is possible to do server-side tracking with Google Analytics as well. If you're interested in that, check out the measurement protocol. There is a really nice tutorial on how to do that. And I think it's a bit hard to manage, as I said, but it can be worth to give it a try. What is tag management about? I think in your web analytics setup, tag management is the foundation for the house and web analytics is what you build on top. Just if you haven't worked with a tag management system yet, this is what Google Tag Manager looks like. These are tags and these are basically those marketing snippets. And what does that all do? In the end, it just provides you with a container where you put those snippets in. You get these lines of codes. For example, Google Analytics has this page view line of code that loads Google Analytics, sends a page view, sends different events. This is what you put in your tag management system. So it provides a container for all your tags. You only need to implement one tag on every page now, hard-coded. That's the only thing you do. That's a Google Tag Manager snippet. It's 5 lines of code, basically, pasted on every page. And then you can incept code through Google Tag Manager. That's how it works. So it's basically just a container that inserts code on your page. Why that is good or not, we will see on the following slides. And within that Google Tag Manager interface, you can control when or where you want to fire which piece of code. Just to go quickly in the different tag manager alternatives we have, the different options. We have open source, we have one open source solution, which is 7tag. I don't think it's ready yet. It's in public beta. Maybe give it a try. I think it will be really nice in a bit of time. Then in the accessible segment, we basically only have Google Tag Manager. There are some others, but they just can't compare, I would say. And we have lots of them in the enterprise segment, where we have Telium and Szeidenleder and so on. But if you're not working really in an enterprise environment, I'm not sure if that makes sense, because they're really expensive. Just to have a look at the market, 84% is Google Tag Manager. This is a statistic from BuildWith. The entire web is what they were checking there for tag management system usage. And you can see there the relevant market share is only the enterprise solutions, and the other ones are basically relying on Google Tag Manager. Why would you even use one of these enterprise tag management systems like Telium and Szeidenleder and so on, if you're in an enterprise environment with really huge, then it's much more important to have like redundancy, service level agreements. You get trainings from them, everything you might maybe need. Let's not go too deep into that. Let's rather see what other organizational problems can arise when you have a tag management solution in your company. Because one thing, I mean, you put that tag management there, but one thing hardly anyone considers is that it means a change in responsibility. Because now you're opening your website basically to the whole company. You're allowing marketing guys to insert code on your website. And I would encourage you to do so, to give that Google tag management system to a marketing person, because otherwise it will not be used properly. But this can lead to problems, obviously, because you don't want a non-technical person to insert JavaScript on your website. I think we can agree on that one. I just sketched down a typical conversation that could happen. For example, marketing, very enthusiastic, hey, I'm just putting that new pixel for you, just new tracking code for the new channel, and we can get started with Instagram right away. Then development goes, oh, what the heck, we have another JS error here, how did that happen? Business intelligence eventually looking at the data, oh come on, this is all wrong, how can that be? And obviously you get management involved as well, and they say, come on, can't you just tell me the customer acquisition cost we're having this month? How can that be this difficult? So why is that? How can that happen? This is at the example of Google Tag Manager. It's such an easy tool. I can explain you in 4 sentences what it does. It inserts code on the website. You have tags that define what code you insert, what you want to have tracked. You have triggers that define when you insert that, when you load it, and you have variables to put some custom data as well. That's it. But I read a very nice analogy of that. Google Tag Manager is a chainsaw, because it's very simple, but it's very powerful. You're inserting code on your website, and this is something you should never forget. So how do you overcome these organizational challenges? You shouldn't restrict the tag management system to your developers. I think so. Even though mostly of you are developers, I think it should be used by a bigger circle of people, because otherwise you will lose potential. But you will have to have a very clear owner of that, and in the best case, I think this would be an analyst or a technical person in marketing. And in the beginning, if you don't have that, have the developers check everything that is being implemented and make a process there. Otherwise, it will get a mess. Then I will go into web analytics, and there I want to show, I won't go into detail what web analytics is doing. I have 2 slides on that where we go quickly through. Obviously, we have in the accessible segment, we have Google Analytics and many other competitors, then enterprise, also Adobe Marketing Cloud, all that kind of stuff. And in freeware, we have Pivik, which is probably one of the views that are important to mention. But what are the basic functions? As also mentioned in the chain before, you want to use your web analytics to do ad hoc reporting. you want it to do campaign steering, you want it to get behavior insight of your users, but what you must not forget is it's also a source for your data warehouse. And this is where it can build the link. Obviously, there are ways to work around that. I will show one later on, but in most of the cases, it's also a very important data source. This is what brings me to a case I had with a client where we figured out a solution. The role of Google Analytics. I mean, it has become a bit of an industry standard that you're using it. The reason is probably because it ties in very well with other Google products, but you don't have any access to raw data unless you get Google Analytics Premium. What's the difference between Google Analytics Premium and non-premium? It's 150K per year, some beta features, and that you get your raw data. And don't underestimate the raw data, because it's very important if you want to write that your analytics data into a data warehouse. It won't be possible without that. Unless there is one workaround, but it's a bit nasty to be honest. You can try to aggregate your data on a user ID and a timestamp that you send with as a custom dimension there called in Google Analytics, which is basically just an additional value that you set. You can do that using tag management systems and Google Analytics. You just set an additional value that sends a timestamp with every hit you send, and then you will be able to draw that data from the API. And then you get basically data on hit level. This is, I think, a bit nasty, but it works. I've seen it working, but it will obviously also get pretty complex for bigger data sets. There is another workaround solution. And what you can do is you set an additional tracking tool that is cheaper than 150K per year. I would still keep Google Analytics running, to be honest, because you want to have that. When you get a new marketer, they will all know Google Analytics, but probably not all of them will know that other tool you might decide for. But then you could set up additionally maybe Pivik or Snowplow is a really nice tool to do that as well. That will basically bypass the info or the same data to your data warehouse, and you make Google Analytics basically a dead end point that doesn't go anywhere further in the chain, that you only use for ad hoc analysis. There is another problem though when you do that. AdWords is not going to play that game with you because they're using this click ID I mentioned in the beginning, which is that cryptic number. And you will not be able to resolve that click ID number, which would give you the campaign data and everything you need to know, unless you're using the integration with Google Analytics. So if you don't pass along the data from Google Analytics, you have that problem. You just don't get it. You just don't get the data. And this is actually what I figured out together with that client. I mean, I knew that something like this was about to happen, but we didn't have a solution, and they didn't have a solution in place either. We figured another workaround for that. Maybe also not the nicest workaround, but this is actually working too. You can use the URL parameters and this click ID at the same time. It's not recommended by Google, but it's possible. I would do it that way though, because with the click ID in Google Analytics, you get some more additional data as well. But you get the right campaign data and the right source, medium, all that parameters you wouldn't get in your data warehouse in the end if you send both. So the downside obviously is for every link that you have, you need to manually set the UTM parameters, which is kind of a hassle. But there is one feature in AdWords which is called value track, which can help you to do that quite quickly if you have that problem. So, coming to the end, pretty well on time. The data warehouse itself. I will just give you a very, very simplified overview on how you could start a data warehouse if you don't have one. I mean, we heard a presentation before about SQL and NoSQL databases. I'm not an expert in that field. I just want to give you a starting point if you don't have one yet. This is a database setup I have seen with several clients, and it works pretty well. Obviously, highly simplified the data warehouse in 3 steps. Set up a Postgres server, for example. create some EDL scripts in Python where you access all the APIs you want to get data from, like cost data and everything. Facebook has an API you can access. AdWords has an API. Google Analytics has an API, provided the restriction we spoke about before. This is where you can all draw data from. And then you put on top some visualization. Easy, huh? Like Tableau would be good. You can use Excel, obviously. Obviously, this is not suitable for huge amounts of data because it will get slow eventually. But there's a ton other ways of how to do it. There's tons of tools. But I think this is a good start if you don't have one yet. This is what it would look like in a graph. You take your data from other sources like cost data, create these ETL scripts. I would suggest Python to do that. And within the database, it makes sense if you don't have something like that in place to have 3 different layers. So you would have a raw data layer where you just put in all the data. Then you would normalize the data in, I would call it the intelligence layer. And there you just say, okay, we put all the cost data in one table. We put all the hit data in one table. And this will allow you to create reports in the business layer. This is where I will put all the business logics and say, yeah, this report will consist of this and that. I'm a fan of doing as much calculations as possible on the server. We might argue about this as well. And in the end, yeah, you just do your reporting on that using some kind of visualization tool like Excel or Tableau, and you can feed that in your R or Pandas or whatever other tool you want to work with. Small summary, I want to tell you, always keep in mind the entire chain. The important thing is, and this is what I want to tell you with this presentation, one change in the other might heavily influence something at the end of the chain. If someone forgets to set the UTM parameters in the marketing, if you have a lazy marketing team doing that, you won't be able to do proper analysis in your BI part, in your data warehouse. I would recommend you always use tag management, and even though speaking to developers, I would encourage you to give that away to other people as well and educate them on how to use it properly. Show them how JavaScript works. I have 2 other small topics before finishing. If you want to go into further detail, unfortunately the time frame was too short. I think I could do 2 extra presentations about that. I think the data layer is a very important concept if you want to go deeper into tag management. And this is the way the data is handled inside of the tag management, between the website and the tag management. And I think attribution modeling is going to be of the hot topics of marketing, where if you have a multi-channel customer journey, for example, having a customer first seeing your Facebook advertisement, then seeing your SEA advertisement, then coming in by organic, which channel is responsible for the sale? Is it the last one? Is it the first one? Is it one in the middle? And there are so many different solutions to that, and also very different tactical solutions that can be implemented at many different steps. There are one that integrate in your tag management, there are some that integrate in your web analytics, and there are some you would put in your data warehouse. So I think this is a very interesting topic, and they will come up a lot in the future. And if you want to go deeper into detail, I think these 2 topics are very interesting. Thank you very much. I think I would open the round for a question now.
I'd like to mention a few things. For example, if it's a distributed network, you will never get full server-side data analytics.
True.
Second thing is Google Analytics. You can send time data, and after that train them. But what you really want to do usually is send the user ID. Google has a privacy. You can't send IPs or personalized data like first names, bank accounts, whatever.
I know.
This is the reason why Prevail or whatever other management systems are used, and why they pay a lot of money, because, for example, banks will not need to use those privacy concerns. Use cases out of those privacy concerns. And a few others, but I don't want to disturb all the questions.
Okay, well, no, I mean, I agree. You have this user ID feature in Google Analytics, especially, which is very interesting to do cross-device tracking.
It enables custom dimensions and variables as well, but you need to understand there are limitations for the free and premium users.
I understand that.
Yeah, you can.
Do you have any question or not?
And any other question? Good.
Does the tag manager offer any additional value in addition to, for example, a marketing person can enter the tags as opposed to event tracking that the developer can do?
Yes. I mean, obviously, that's the most important point. I think is that you're shifting your responsibilities because in many companies, IT tends to be the bottleneck, and tracking is never a top priority. Obviously, when your checkout funnel is broken, how can you tell an IT guy to set up some tracking? And this is where you want to enable your marketing to do that themselves, because to them, tracking is highly important. They will need to steer their campaigns with that. And they will have a completely different focus, because they will track completely different data than a developer would. What I see a lot is that tracking implemented purely by developers is obviously perfectly implemented, but is often in how the data is being received in Google Analytics, for example, hard to read. So when you go there from a marketing perspective, they will take the other way around. They will first think, what data do I actually want and how will I put that? Instead of going, what data do I have available, what can I implement? And I think that is one advantage. On the other hand, the Google Tag Manager and other tag management systems allow you to be much more granular on steering when you want to fire a certain tag and when you want to load a certain tag. And you will be able to add much more additional values and data to that, because you have several different options to grab that data. And the biggest advantage, I think, is much more manageable, because you can sit there any person that knows a bit of JavaScript and is acquainted with the Google Tag Manager, and he will understand what you're doing. When you have to review the code, it's much more complicated. And I've seen so many setups where the developer has changed, and no one is remembering where a certain Google Analytics event is being fired. And this goes as far as that we had to discard certain accounts because it was just not possible to find that anymore. Any other?
Can you suggest any further reads about this tag management, so how to build good tag management system?
Yes, I would recommend, especially for Google Tag Manager, I would recommend you the blog of Simo Ahava. It's a Finnish guy actually, and he's that #1 go-to person when it comes to Google Tag Manager. And he has lots of best practices, like SIMO, and surname is AHAVA. And yeah, he has lots of best practices written about how working with the Google Tag Manager. Pretty good one. Any other question? Great, thanks a lot then. Thank you very much.